Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining me in this session. Instead of enjoying the beautiful weather outside, let's just keep inside and let's enjoy another session. I'm not going to talk about an app that grossed me about 42K, but I will give you some advice and some insights in how you can be the next one who will be earning a shitload of money. I don't know if I can say shitload in Germany, but I assume that I can say shitload without Cremo having to beep everything out of the edit. And otherwise, good luck, Cremo, with a shitload that I can say. But anyways, let's see what this whole Forge thing is about. And to introduce you all, this is me. It's a big picture of myself. So next time we can meet physically, you know, we can give that beautiful college beer to. I'm Tom Moors. I'm from Belgium. I'm also an org leader in Belgium. It's over there that Cremo scouted me and asked me to present this presentation in the German crowd as well. And in my during daytime, I'm an Atlassian hero at Idelco. No, we don't wear capes, but we do implement Atlassian solutions. And I, for myself, I'm doing that since 2009. So that's a whopping 12 years that I'm creating beautiful solutions based on the Atlassian stack, Jira, Confluence, Bitbucket, the whole shebang. You can always ping out to me using Twitter, or you can send me an email. You can see both on the slide. And talking about Idelco, there's some beautiful thing going on. It is fireworks. It's because Idelco exists for 10 years. And Idelco, what's Idelco? Here's the slide that says in one slide what 10,000 words couldn't do. Idelco is a Belgium-based platinum partner, or I have to say we started in Belgium. Right now we have 4 hubs because we don't really have offices. Most of the people are just working remotely, but we do have 4 hubs. We do have hubs in Belgium, in France, in Costa Rica, and in Ukraine, where about 70 plus heroes are working to serve more than 2,000 customers. Basically, the company is split in 2. We have a consultancy part and we have a product side. The product side creates products like Xslate for syncing solutions and Table Grid Editor, which is a table style custom field to put your Jira on steroids. I, for myself, I do work on the consulting and licensing side. So I'm the one who tries to make customers smile. And without further ado, let's dive into the topic of today. And before we can do that, let's see how we actually can customize a platform, how we can customize the whole Atlassian Jira Confluence shebang. Because of course, if we know where we come from, it's easier to see where we're heading. In order to do that, we'll dive and we will see about the whole platform thingy. What kind of platforms are there actually? So we know in the beginning there was only server, and then suddenly we started gluing servers together, and suddenly we had the data center. And there's something in the air, and that's cloud. But what's all the difference, and how do we compare? And there's only one great way to tell you all about the nitty-gritty details and how everything started, and that's of course by going back to the beginning. And let's show. Oh, that's just a timeline, and the timeline starts in April 2002. And April 2002, again, fireworks. And fireworks because Jira 1.0 got released. And the great part of that release of Jira is because Scott and Mike decided to deliver the source code as well. So initially, when people started implementing the Jira out there, they just changed some files. They recompiled some code parts, and this way they could customize everything to in the way they would love to do or need to do. And even today, that's a customization part that's still valid. Some knowledge base articles in the Atlassian knowledge base even point you towards which files you should make changes to. For example, if you want to make changes to email templates, you still have to dive into the actual source in order to make some changes. But that's back in 2002. Another thing happened, and that thing happened in October 2004. And suddenly we had Jira 3.0. We had a plugin system. It was plugin type 1, as we call it right now, which is actually a nice way of bundling code, which is loaded in the application itself. The bigger problem is that it's using the same class loader as the application itself. So we might have dependency problems, and we always had to restart the application in order to install a plugin. So every time you want to try a plugin, you had to restart your instance. So that was kind of spooky sometimes. And sometimes you really had some problems with specific versions of the plugin not working with the actual version of the application itself. But luckily, going back to 2011, we have a Jira 4.3, and that included the release of the plugins type 2. It was an OSGI-based framework, and that was really super massive, very cool, because this way we have a very clear separation of the plugins, the class loader of the plugins, the class loader of the application itself. So it was already more stable. And also it was possible to just click and install a plugin or remove one without having to restart the whole application. So this P2 thingy is a very powerful one. It's 2011. Remember that date. And diving into the plugin type 2 kind of style plugins, how does it actually work? Well, let's take a look at the inside of your machine, of your server. So this is a big one, very fancy server. We can install lots of things on this machine. We can install a database to store the data, and also we can install applications. And so within an application, let's say that we have Jira. Within the application, we have some specific parts on top of that, some different components. And these components, as you might see, you see some gadgets, you see some app links, REST API. These are really the parts that make up Jira itself. So as you see, in order to create a plugin, P2 plugin, we're actually using the same components that Jira is using. And even better, Atlassian itself used the P2 framework in order to create new features. So many new features or many ways that Jira got extended was based on these type of plugins. So it was really something that Atlassian was totally committed to, because it really helped themselves by expanding the whole product set. And also it meant something great and terrific for the people delivering some plugins. Before we have this whole shebang, it was really a Wild West. But then suddenly around 2011, 2012, we did have a marketplace. The marketplace wasn't there yet in the beginning. In the beginning, it was really like some apps that were sold on the website from a separate vendor with their own licensing mechanics. But thanks to the marketplace and the integration with the whole plugins, it was really, it became feasible to build a whole company on top of the Atlassian Jira Confluence products in a very intuitive and simple way. On this marketplace, a great set of plugins started to arrive. Like we have the Script Runner, which already existed for ages, long before the marketplace existed. There was already an open source Groovy Runner written by Jamie Eklund. This plugin was acquired by Adaptavist in 2014, and they took it into ways that Jamie on itself could never take them. Adaptavist took the brand Script Runner and brought it to Confluence, to Bitbucket, integrated many different features. And it is like really a Swiss Army knife on top of Jira, on top of Confluence. Allows you to adapt Jira in so many ways. You can add specific scripted custom fields, scripts, listeners. You can change the UI, etc. A very powerful product. So everybody who is working on server or data center these days probably will have a Script Runner somewhere. Another powerhouse that that started its life as a P2 plugin was automation for Jira. Actually, it was a 20% time project. It started just within Atlassian itself, and the guys who created the plugin left Atlassian, built a business around it, and then got reacquired by Atlassian itself. And right now it's integrated with the application itself, but also very powerful because we don't have to write a single code line, but we can automate a lot of things. And even we can even provide all this expressive power towards end users, towards the project manager or scrum master, whoever is in charge of a project, is able to optimize the way how he, she, or their team work together. So that's a very powerful premise, of course. So that's the whole server data center part. We know we can see that we have massive amounts of customization options. So how does it work on the other side? And that other side is something that's not on your own premise. So basically, whenever you're running Jira or Confluence on someone else's computer, what's the history over there? Well, that actually started in 2008 when Jira Studio got launched. And Jira Studio was really a proper dedicated VM, a virtual machine, which contains Jira and some developer tools, specifically tailored towards one specific customer. And you could use this set just to get bootstrapped with Jira, with boards, with a Subversion repository, everything that was hot and cool back in the days. They started to remove those. They stopped selling those back in 2012, but that's only because they had another option coming up, and that was the on-demand. And on-demand started in October 2011, and it was really the same part, but a bit better. So we had virtual machines for customers. So a customer could ask a Jira instance or Confluence instance on demand. A new machine was created, and they had a nice selection of functionality. And the on-demand brand got rebranded into Cloud back in 2014, and that's the platform how we know it these days. Of course, if we just overlay all customization options that we had on server, we could see that, or we could change files and recompile code, or we have some plugins. Yeah. Can we actually change files and recompile code whenever we're using the computer from someone else? Of course not. Let's burn that down to the ground because that's not feasible. But what is feasible is the other plugin system that we had. And actually, that's the way how it started. So the Jira Studio, the on-demand in the beginning, it was possible to have some select third-party plugins to be bundled. Like the Jira Suite Utilities was bundled in a specific version. Tempo even had a specific version of the timesheets because they were so popular at the time. So they were allowed to bundle a version of their plugin towards Atlassian. But of course, this was not ideal because every time Atlassian was trying to make some changes or did a new upgrade, they also had a dependency on third-party developers. So Atlassian was looking for a solution. And as we can see, around 2015, the Atlassian Connect framework saw birth. And we can see that there's a nice overlap between the start of the Atlassian Connect framework and the final decommission of the third-party plugins that were bundled with the cloud instances. So of course, because it takes some time to grow a new platform. And whenever we release something, so much work to do. So it took some time to get the Atlassian Connect framework to get all the superpowers that would be feasible with just using the P2 with having access to the actual components with the actual code. It took some time to get the same level of maturity. But you can see that around 2018-19, the last instances in the cloud got decommissioned of their third-party products. And from that moment on, everything that was on cloud was totally owned by Atlassian itself. Also, within the rebranding in cloud, Atlassian itself also started changing the architecture. So back in the on-demand days, it was really exactly the same version of the application as was running on your own computer. But during the cloud rebranding, they decided to just branch it out and make a different version and allow new engineering practices like creating microservices, like just instead of having to spin up a gazillion virtual machines, just make sure that you have a pool of resources that's spread across the customers. But of course, making sure that security is key, is paramount. So everything you do is always making sure that you have the proper isolation. That's about the platform. So we know that the platform is already a bit different than it is on server data center. So what's the whole Connect thingy? And therefore I have a slide and I simplified a lot. Most important of using Connect is the fact that you have the Atlassian infrastructure. You have, for example, Jira over there, and you have the infrastructure of the application developer. And back in the days of the P2 plugin, everything was on the same instance. So the code from a developer would just live inside the Jira instance. The database everything would be on the same machine. Right now, all that kind of information, all the storage, third-party, business logic, routing, authentication, etc., is done app developer infrastructure that might be on a different place on the earth. And the only way how the app developer is able to communicate to Jira, to Confluence, whatsoever, is by using the public APIs. So that also might take some time. And why? Well, Atlassian currently is operating in 6 data centers. So across the world. Depending on where you are as a customer, you might be moved towards another data center that might be near you. Is also very intense for developers, of course, because if you're a small developer and you have to operate in 6 different data centers, in the previous presentation, we saw some numbers from Sven for the price for S3 storage. If you have to multiply that infrastructure, you have to multiply it in 6 data centers. That's a lot of work for a small vendor, for a small team of bootstrapping yourself. So basically, what are the problems? And watch out for the funny animation. There it is. Of course, we have latency. The fact that our application has to do a round trip to the Atlassian instance and go back. Of course, that will introduce some time, some latency, in order to get some feedback, to get a feeling about what's happening. Very important these days, and especially I think in the German market, is the whole regulation aspect. We have user-generated content, we have personal data, we have personal identifier information. How do we handle those? Right now, with the standard Connect framework, all the data is being exposed, is being taken from Jira, moved towards the infrastructure of the partner, of the vendor, processed over there, and then something is being sent to the customer. So whenever you want to make sure that your solution works, you not only have to vet the whole Atlassian stack, but also every single stack of a potential plugin that you're using. So that's already introducing an additional headache. Of course, the data residency might be another thing, as Sven already showed. The fact that you would be able to just upload data only within Germany and that it would never leave Germany is something that's very valuable and required in many industries. But of course, that's something that's right now something that you need to take care of yourself. And with the data residency, we also have the scale and the cost. So if you really want to have the infrastructure in all the data centers, you have the other problem. Of course, you have lots of data centers, and then you need to see where the actual scale comes from. And for example, you have your application installed in 6 data centers, and suddenly overnight in America, for example, you created the Super Bowl advertisement. Everybody's super enthusiastic about your app, and suddenly everybody wants to start a trial. And suddenly you have to provide infrastructure for a huge amount of people who start using your application at the same time. So really have to make sure that you are able to scale for that kind of load. And when they stop trying your application, it's possible that the infrastructure doesn't need to be that beefy. And suddenly you want to scale back in order to reduce your costs. So that's very intense as well. And of course, the developer experience about the whole thing. The fact that you not only have to write code, but you have to take care of so many details on the legal perspective, on an infrastructure perspective, etc., makes it rather hard to move forward. So let's talk about that whole Forge thingy. What is Forge? Well, basically, and I took a very nice slide from Atlassian, so I didn't have to make this one myself. Forge has 3 things that they offer. So the first part is, of course, the fact that it's hosted by Atlassian itself. The second part is the fact that it's possible to customize the applications in a very different way using Forge UI, more on that later. And the last one is the developer experience. Might be some work, but they're really working towards offering a better way of providing solutions, of making it feasible to develop in a timely and very interesting way without having to waste too much time on infrastructure thingies, on deploying on all the several instances, etc. So let's dive into the infrastructure part. So what's Forge trying to offer? So we see over here the Connect scheme, where we have the Atlassian infrastructure, we have the app developer infrastructure. Essentially, what we try to do with Forge is make it possible to share the infrastructure from Atlassian with Forge developers. And so a developer is able to provide some code, and that code will be hosted at the same data center, the same location where the actual Atlassian instance is hosted. Of course, very important. Security is very, very, very important over here. That's something that they didn't take lightly. So it's very hard isolated. It's in a separate sandbox. It's in a separate AWS account. So even if it would get compromised, they would never ever get towards Atlassian itself. But we do have the possibilities that we were nearby. All the sensitive data that's going in and out is being controlled. And thanks to the fact that everything is moved towards the Atlassian infrastructure, of course, the latency and the scalability issues are being resolved. So how can we achieve that? How it's possible that our own logic is being handled by Atlassian? And therefore, we introduce the functions as a service platform, as we can call it FaaS, is the AWS, the Amazon Web Services Lambda functions. And that's really a very interesting part. It's an offering of Amazon where you only have to pay for an execution. So in order to, classically, we really had to buy a computer, we had to install it. And if we would anticipate on a big load of customers that would arrive, we really need to make sure that we have a very beefy computer. So it would cost us like 20, 30K just to buy a computer. Then we need to make sure that we have the internet connection, the backup line, etc. We can just rent a machine. And this is even one step further. So with a function, we don't even care about the machine itself. We just provide some code, and we just pay for every time our code got executed. And this is the platform that Atlassian took and improved in order to provide Forge. So the whole runtime for Forge applications, it's Node.js based, so it's JavaScript. And that itself runs in a very nice sandbox. It's totally isolated. And this allows us to make sure that we have the code, it is run, and it's strictly secure. Of course, we can't do everything with EFAS. There are some quotas, there are some limits. So right now, these are the limits. I put the link underneath because they might change during the next years. But right now, it's a very harsh 10 seconds that you get in order to get your action going, and then the app is killed in order to not waste any more resources. There's also the amount of time in total. There's also a limit over there. There's also a limit about the amount of storage that your app might use, and you can see already, and that's a very interesting one, there's a distinction between the paid apps, the free apps, and distributed apps. So by using Forge, Atlassian is bringing back the possibility of providing free or open source applications toward the whole Atlassian stack. That's something that was fairly feasible back in the server days. Many plugins started as free plugins or open source plugins. But on cloud, it was not really possible because you always had to provide some infrastructure. So right now, thanks to Forge, thanks to the fact that Atlassian is hosting everything, they're actually opening up the possibility of providing some free apps and providing just the infrastructure that's built in your own license that you already pay for towards Atlassian. So you can have some free apps to offer you some functionality without a vendor having to pay for all that infrastructure himself. So that's the whole Atlassian hosting part. It's a very, it's really a huge part, something that's very interesting. But even more interesting is the next part, and that's the Forge UI. So in order for Connect applications to extend the Atlassian host application, basically everything was making use of iframes. And iframe is basically a web page within a web page. And this offers you a sandbox so that you know whenever you embed a web page within the other web page, the web page that's embedded is not able to change the page, the mother page, the parent page. It's not able to change anything about it. It's not able to see some secrets or whatsoever. So that really allows you to enable a platform or enable external information, external changes, customized components without having having an impact on Atlassian stability, scalability, waiting times, etc. The only problem, of course, is that everything had to be an iframe. So in Forge, they're introducing Forge UI, which is really a set of components. The syntax is very heavily React inspired, but they're dedicated. So sometimes there's a dedicated filter towards making sure that they actually fit. And these UI snippets, these components can be used to extend your whole application. And in that, in your own application, you can see them nicely embedded instead of having a very big iframe that's empty and suddenly it loads and you see something else. It's really possible to make some changes, some small changes. Lately, they also added the custom UI option. So it's possible to just upload your own. Okay, it's possible to just upload your own CSS JavaScript images and just make sure that you, whenever the Forge UI is too limited, that you can just upload the whole UI and make your own product itself. So the Forge UI components really look and feel like the actual Atlassian components. So whenever you use these components, it really looks and feels like an actual application. And even these Forge UI components, if you are familiar with React, you can see that this is actually the React lifecycle of a component that's being taken care of thanks to the use of a function as a service as the Lambda framework. So thanks to Forge UI, you can have a stateful application just while keeping everything on that Forge side on the Atlassian infrastructure without having your own server. And it's very interesting, very powerful as well, because this way we can really build our own applications. We can even use our own modules, our own popular libraries that are available on the internet to do some things, and we can expose them towards our applications. And what kind of modules do we have to make some changes? Well, we have the classic ones. For example, it's possible to have a schedule trigger or a web trigger, so something you can just, or a trigger is something that happens when something happens within your application. As you can say, for example, we're just going to execute this specific functionality every night, or we can just react whenever you create a new page in Confluence or you updated an issue in Jira or whatsoever. Very powerful already. And then we have separate modules per product. This is a list that keeps on changing. As we already discussed before, Forge is really in flux. So things start changing. You can see some beta labels right now. Everything on this page used to have beta labels. So they already moved at blazing speed, adding new items, making sure that things are very well designed so they can remove the beta label and move forward. So basically the cool things in Confluence are possible, the cool things in Jira are possible, and they're even improving all the modules that you could create. So how much does it cost? Right now, it's free to use Forge until the end of 2023. Atlassian really needs more information in order to decide what the actual business plan would be. Ideally, it would be as free as possible. Just make it sure that it's something that's part of your license that you have whenever you acquire Jira Confluence. But they will tell us later if that's actually the case or if the usage is really going skyrocketing high, making Atlassian's credit card hurt whenever they have to pay their AWS fees. So the big question for everyone who is technical or who is following along, is Forge really replacing Connect? Atlassian says no. And so right now we do have two frameworks. We have Connect, which is the whole framework that allows a vendor to have their own infrastructure with their own compute integrations with the iframes. We have Forge that's limited, more integrated. Is it going to replace Connect? No. So Atlassian said that they were just trying to make sure that it's becoming one platform. And as Sven already mentioned, last week there was a developer day, and on the developer day they reiterated that one. And the fact that they're really working towards one platform to make sure that that's the only platform that vendors should use, and that's providing or combining both strengths from both platforms. So that's the future. So in the future, everything should be towards Forge, but Connect is being supported, and they're wanting to make sure that every vendor that's using Connect these days, that there's still a pod to use all the functionality that they have. They're still able to do it, but that they also can make use of all the functionality of the things that Forge is promising. Like for data residency, of course, this is a very important piece of the puzzle. But enough of the theory. Now it's time to get some cooking done. In order to do that, we'll just dive into our terminal. We're going to install Forge. So in order to install Forge, we just have to make sure that we have a fairly modern computer. We have Node and Docker installed. We can just install Forge. Second is make sure that we have an ID from Atlassian and an ID token. There's the URL, and the slides will be shared after the session. So whenever you go to this URL, you can click on the button Create API Token. That's the blue button over there. You can give a label to your token, and then you can you'll get your token. Very important. Make sure that you copy that one, because you will never ever see that again. If you forget to copy it, you really have to delete it and recreate it. And with this token, you're able to log in with your credentials. And you will have access to all the instances that your account has access to. So that's a very powerful token. So you really want to make sure that you don't share it with anybody else. When we go back to our terminal, we just type Forge login. We'll type our email address, and then you can provide your API token, and then you're good to go. And when we're good to go, we can start building. But of course, where are we going to build? Are we really going to build right into our own production system? Of course not. Let's create a development instance. And in order to do that, we will see the link over here, go to atlassian.com/clouddev. Whenever you start a new instance over there, you will get a free instance. And it's free. It's really like a standard cloud instance, but just with a limited set of users. And whenever you are starting to, when you have more than these amount of users, one service agent, 5 users, you just start paying the normal standard pricing. But for most of the development purposes, that's perfectly fine. And now we have everything working over here. What's the next part? Yeah, thinking what we're going to build, of course. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to improve a default workflow validator that comes out of the box with Jira. And what is the problem? The problem is a cascading select field. So we know in Jira we can add some custom fields. One of the custom field types that we can add is a cascading select. And cascading select is basically a combination of 2 lists. And we have one list, we can make a selection. And when we make a selection, we can open a second list, and it will show a selection based on the first one. So very straightforward. We just call this field budget. We want to make sure that whenever we start working on an issue, we have the correct budget provided. So in order to do that, we can change our workflow. We can go to our transition. We add the validator. And then we can see that in that validator, we have a nice one, the field required validator. And in the list of required fields, you can see that we have our budget. And so everything is in place. So let's see how that works. We go to Jira, we enjoy our new issue view. We click on the workflow part on the button, and we will see, all right, we just want to start work. The screen pops up. I just click start work, and oh, the validator is working because the field budget is required. I just provide the company. Oh, that's not okay. So right now I'm able to move towards the second status. I'm right now in progress, but I didn't select any project. So that's bad Jira, but luckily we can fix that with Forge. How can we fix it? Let's dive into. So we just open up a new terminal into our favorite directory. We just ask Forge to create a new application. We give it a name, ABCDE22 demo, and we say that we want to create a very nice new Forge app in the category triggers and validators. It's a Jira workflow validator. We wait a second, and there it is. So right now we just created our own app. Now the only thing we're going to change is whenever we open this this folder into our favorite editor, might be Visual Code, which has a very decent support. We'll see that we have a file called manifest.yaml, and we'll just adapt that one and make sure that it looks like this. So over here, we can see that we can just create a very nice validator. And now we'll just ask Forge to deploy this one. And when we deploy, we actually compiled our sources and put it into the Atlassian Forge unit. And when I say deploy, it's interesting to note that we have actually, by default, whenever we created our instances, we already created 3 separate environments. So we have a development, staging, and production side for Forge. By default, whenever we don't provide any environment, it's always going to use the development one. So we did install it. No, we didn't install it yet. We're going to install it. So we just ask Forge to install, and you can just provide the URL of the instance that you want to install your plugin to. And whenever you do that, it's properly linked. So the code that we uploaded using the deploy command is now linked in the installation that we provided over here. And now when we go back and we adapt our workflow, we'll just go back to the validators. We select a new one and we can see that our project customer required validator is over there. It's nicely over there. We can see in big capital letters development, because that's the environment that we currently chose. We can see a nice description. It's done. We save this one. And now when we try again, just click open, start work. It works. He asked me to provide a customer and a project. Start work. Oh, he still complains. So now I really have to provide the project. If I do this, then suddenly it's okay. And I can see in my pinned field that the budget has a company and a project as I would expect it to be. So this was a very straightforward one without actually having to write any code, just making sure, making use of a Jira expression. But we can move even further. And therefore, we'll dive into Confluence. So in Confluence, one of the things that we severely are missing in the cloud is, of course, the usage, the user macros. Confluence user macros are so cool, so powerful, and they're missing in cloud. But luckily, we have Forge, and right now we're able to bring them back. And why do we want to bring them back? Well, let's see an example over here. Let's say that we are just going to create a page. It's called a decision. Just going to decide whether Forge is super toll. We create our page, and then we can see that we have an impact over there, and we have 3 choices: high, medium, low. I'm just going to delete medium and low. The impact right now is high, and I'm going to publish my page. So very straightforward. There are lots of templates that are making use of the status macro. A bit later, I just want to update my page. It was not high, but what was the other called? Yeah, let's just say not so high, and I love purple, publish. There we go. And suddenly we do have a problem. We see that multiple pages are suddenly becoming out of sync. And we really wanted to make sure that we could report on them, that we had a set of status macros that we could provide. And whenever we go to the list, that we could see one of those indicators. And suddenly, the first time you edit the page, it's not visible anymore what the other options would be. So that's something that we can do better. And how are we going to do that? Of course, by using a Forge app. So we're going to create a new Forge app. And right now we're going to create something from the category UI kit. We're going to make a Confluence macro. For the more technical people over here, always use TypeScript if you can, because it really is going to save you lots of time whenever you're working in the JavaScript world. So we create the status macro. We have the 3 separate developments, and we're good to go. So we open up our manifest again, and now we're going to change it a bit different. So we can see that within the modules section, right now we do have a macro, and we call it red, amber, green status. We provide a description, and we also ask, we also provide the possibility to configure our macro. So this is just the manifest, a descriptor. It's just describing how our Forge plugin would work. The second part is actually providing the information. And therefore, we need basically 2 parts. The one part is, of course, providing the configuration. And that's something that we see over here. If this syntax is not yet familiar, that's probably because you're not yet familiar with React. But fear not, it's actually very straightforward to get started. especially with the simple parts. Whenever you're starting to build some real applications, some very powerful ones, you definitely want to dive a bit deeper into this whole shebang. Right now, the whole config, I'll just provide the macro config with one select component. So I just want to have a pick list with 3 options, a red, amber, and a green one. That's my configuration. So whenever I want to create a macro, this is a configuration that I would love to have. And the other part is, of course, how am I going to view the whole shebang, and therefore I'm using this part. So I'm mapping my pre-configured with a specific losange style. So Confluence comes with a whole set of components provided. So over here, I'm just saying that I want to link a specific configuration with a specific style. That's my whole app. So when I deploy this one, I install it to my instance, and I'll try again. So suddenly, what do I see? I click on the page, I add my macro, and on the right side, this is a new Confluence editor. On the right side, I can see that I have one pick list. And over there, I can always choose which particular status that I would love to use. I can publish my page, and it looks just the same. So this is really the functionality that we had back in the days with the user macros. Now, thanks to the Forge powers back in the cloud hands as well. And that leaves me to one slide, and that's to thank you all for keeping awake and enjoying, hoping enjoying yourself watching this whole shebang.